In the fog-choked shadows of Blackthorn Manor, Hercule Poirot faces a nightmare beyond reason. Brutal murders, cryptic messages, and an ancient evil called the Watcher. As bodies pile up, each throat torn and marked by a sinister symbol, Poirot uncovers a cursed tablet and a killer hiding among the terrified guests. With time running out, can he outwit a malevolent force that sees all, knows all, and claims all, before it binds them forever? This hook emphasizes the eerie atmosphere, the escalating terror, Poirot's central role, and the supernatural stakes, all while maintaining suspense to draw the audience into the story. Let me know if you'd like further tweaks or a different tone. Chapter 1. The Mysterious Invitation. The fog clung to the streets of London like a shroud, muffling the clatter of horse-drawn carriages and the distant cries of newspaper boys. It was a cold, damp evening in November, and the gas lamps flickered, weakly, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. Hercule Poirot, the renowned Belgian detective, sat in his impeccably tidy apartment at Whitehaven Mansions, his small, precise hands folded over the polished surface of his desk. His mustache, waxed to perfection, gleamed faintly in the glow of the fire, and his green eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the letter before him with a mixture of curiosity and unease. The letter had arrived that morning, slipped under his door by an unseen hand. It was written on heavy cream-colored paper, the kind that spoke of wealth and secrecy, and the handwriting was elegant but hurried, as though the writer had been gripped by some urgent compulsion. Poirot read it again, his lips pursed, his mind already turning over the implications of its cryptic words. "Monsieur Poirot," it began, "your reputation precedes you. I implore you to attend a gathering at Blackthorn Manor, on the edge of Dartmoor, this coming Friday. A matter of grave importance awaits your expertise. Lives depend upon your presence. Come alone. Trust no one. The carriage will arrive at dusk. Yours in desperation, a friend. No signature, no return address, only the faint scent of lavender and something else, something metallic like old blood, lingering on the paper." Poirot's fingers twitched as he set the letter down, his mind racing. He was no stranger to anonymous summons, but this one carried a weight that unsettled even his disciplined composure. The phrase, "trust no one," echoed in his thoughts, a warning that suggested treachery lurking in the shadows. He glanced at the clock. It was nearing 7 and the fog outside had thickened, pressing against the windows like a living thing. Poirot rose, his movements deliberate, and crossed to the window, peering into the swirling gray. For a moment he thought he saw a figure standing beneath the street lamp, a tall, gaunt silhouette motionless, watching. But when he blinked, it was gone, swallowed by the mist. A shiver ran down his spine, an unfamiliar sensation for a man who prided himself on his rationality. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, turning away. "What is this feeling?" Hercule Poirot does not succumb to nerves. Yet the unease persisted, coiling in his chest like a serpent. He returned to his desk, his fingers brushing the letter once more. Blackthorn Manor. Dartmoor. The names conjured images of desolate moors and ancient, crumbling estates, places where secrets festered like rot. He had heard whispers of Blackthorn before, rumors of a house cursed by tragedy, its halls stained by inexplicable deaths. But Poirot was not a man to be swayed by superstition. Facts, evidence, the little gray cells. These were his weapons. Still, the letter's urgency gnawed at him, and he resolved to accept the invitation if only to uncover the truth behind its cryptic plea. The days leading to Friday passed in a blur of preparation. Poirot informed his trusted friend, Captain Hastings, of his impending journey, though he kept the details vague, citing only a delicate matter that required his attention. Hastings, ever loyal but prone to romanticizing mysteries, pressed for more, but Poirot deflected with a wave of his hand. "Patience, mon ami," he said. "All will be revealed in time." When Friday arrived, the fog had not lifted. If anything, it had grown denser, wrapping London in a suffocating embrace. At precisely 6 o'clock, as the last light of day bled into dusk, Poirot heard the clatter of hooves outside his building. He donned his overcoat, adjusted his hat, and stepped into the street, where a black carriage waited, its driver cloaked in shadow. The horses snorted, their breath steaming in the cold air, and the driver gestured wordlessly for Poirot to climb aboard. The journey was long and silent, the carriage rattling over cobblestones before giving way to the uneven roads of the countryside. Poirot sat stiffly, his gloved hands clasped, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond the window. The fog seemed to follow them, curling around the carriage like ghostly fingers. Hours passed, and the landscape grew wilder, the air colder. At last the carriage slowed, and Poirot glimpsed the outline of Blackthorn Manor through the mist. A sprawling Gothic pile of stone, its towers clawing at the sky like skeletal hands. The driver opened the door, still silent, and Poirot stepped onto the gravel drive. The manor loomed before him, its windows dark save for a single flickering light on the second floor. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, and a low, mournful wind moaned through the surrounding trees. Poirot's heart quickened, though he would never admit it. He approached the massive oak doors which creaked open before he could knock, revealing a dimly lit hall and a figure waiting within. "Welcome, Monsieur Poirot," said a voice, low and tremulous. It belonged to a woman, her face half hidden in the shadows. She was tall, with pale skin and eyes that gleamed with a mixture of fear and resolve. "I am Evelyn Blackthorn. Thank you for coming." Poirot bowed slightly, his eyes never leaving her. "Madame, your letter was most intriguing, but I must know, why such secrecy? And why me?" Evelyn's lips parted, but before she could answer, a scream tore through the house, a blood-curdling sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Poirot's head snapped toward the source, his hand instinctively tightening around his cane. Evelyn's face drained of color, and she clutched his arm. "It has begun," she whispered. "Please, Monsieur Poirot, you must help us. The darkness is here." The scream faded, replaced by an oppressive silence that pressed against Poirot's ears. He straightened, his mind sharpening like a blade. "Madame," he said calmly, though his heart pounded, "you will tell me everything. But first, take me to where that scream originated." Evelyn nodded, her hands trembling as she led him, deeper into the manor. The hall was lined with portraits, their subjects staring down with hollow eyes, their faces distorted by the flickering candlelight. The air grew colder with every step, and Poirot could not shake the feeling that they were being watched, not by the portraits but by something else, something unseen and malevolent. They ascended a grand staircase, the wood creaking beneath their feet, and entered a long corridor lined with doors. The scream had come from the far end, where a single door stood ajar, spilling a faint, sickly light into the hall. Poirot's steps quickened, his senses alert. He pushed the door open and froze. The room was a study, its walls lined with books and heavy velvet curtains. In the center, sprawled across a Persian rug, lay a man, his throat torn open, blood pooling beneath him like a grotesque halo. His eyes were wide, frozen in terror, and his fingers clutched at the air as though he had been grasping for salvation in his final moments. Above him, scrawled on the wall in crimson, were the words, "It sees all." Poirot's breath caught, but he forced himself to remain composed. He knelt beside the body, his gloved fingers hovering over the wound. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "This is no ordinary murder." Evelyn stifled a sob, her hands pressed to her mouth. That's my brother, Charles," she whispered. "He was alive an hour ago." Poirot's eyes narrowed as he studied the scene. The wound was jagged, unnatural, as though made by claws rather than a blade. The blood was still wet, the air thick with its coppery tang. He rose, his mind racing. "Madame Blackthorn," he said, his voice steady. "Who else is in this house?" Evelyn hesitated, her eyes darting to the shadows. There are 6 others, guests like you and the staff. But I swear, Monsieur Poirot, none of them could have done this. Could not? Poirot raised an eyebrow. Or would not? That, madame, is what we shall discover. He turned back to the body, his gaze lingering on the crimson words. It sees all. The phrase sent a chill through him, though he would never admit it. Something was wrong here, terribly wrong. The manor itself seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, as though the walls themselves were alive, watching, waiting. Madame, he said, turning to Evelyn, lock this door. No one enters until I say. And then, you will introduce me to these guests. Evelyn nodded, her face ashen. As they left the room, Poirot glanced back at the body, at the words on the wall. He had faced murderers before, cunning, ruthless, calculating. But this felt different. This felt like something not entirely human. The corridor stretched, before them the shadows deepening. Somewhere in the house a clock chimed midnight, its tolling heavy and ominous. Poirot's hand tightened on his cane, his mind already piecing together the puzzle. But as they descended the stairs, a low, guttural laugh echoed through the manor, a sound that was not quite human, not quite animal, but something else entirely. Poirot's heart thudded, but he forced a calm smile. Come, Madame Blackthorne, he said. The game, it has begun. And so, Hercule Poirot stepped into the heart of Blackthorne Manor, unaware that the horror awaiting him would test not only his intellect, but his very soul. Chapter 2. A gathering of suspects. The air in Blackthorne Manor grew heavier as Hercule Poirot followed Evelyn Blackthorne down the grand staircase, the echo of that unnatural laugh still lingering in his ears. The manor's vastness seemed to close, in around him, its walls whispering secrets in the flickering candlelight. The portraits along the staircase watched with unblinking eyes, their painted gazes seeming to follow his every step. Poirot's polished shoes clicked against the worn marble, a sharp counterpoint to the oppressive silence that had settled over the house since the scream. His mind, however, was anything but silent. His little gray cells churned, cataloging every detail. The metallic scent of blood, the jagged wound on Charles Blackthorne's throat, and those chilling words scrawled on the wall, "It sees all, Evelyn." Led him to a cavernous drawing room, its high ceilings lost in shadow. A fire crackled in the massive hearth, casting long, dancing shadows across the room, but it did little to dispel the chill that clung to the air. The room was furnished with heavy, antique furniture, mahogany tables, velvet armchairs, and a grand piano that sat silent in the corner, its keys yellowed like old bones. 5 figures awaited them, their faces a mixture of curiosity, fear, and suspicion. They stood or sat in a loose semicircle, as though drawn together by instinct, wary of the darkness beyond the fire's glow. Monsieur Poirot, Evelyn said, her voice trembling slightly. These are the other guests. Poirot's sharp eyes swept over the group, taking in each face, each posture, each subtle tell. He had long believed that the truth of a person could be read in the smallest details, the twitch of a lip, the flicker of an eye, the way a hand rested too tightly on the arm of a chair. Here, in this room, he sensed a web of secrets, each guest a thread waiting to be unraveled. Permit me to introduce myself, Poirot said, his voice calm but commanding. I am Hercule Poirot, and I have been summoned here to address a matter of grave importance. It seems, mes amis, that tragedy has already struck. Charles Blackthorne is dead. A gasp rippled through the group, though Poirot noted that not all reactions were equal. Some eyes widened in shock, others narrowed in calculation. One pair of hands, he observed, remained perfectly still. Evelyn stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. I must explain. My brother Charles invited you all here, though I don't know why. He was secretive even with me, but now Her voice broke and she pressed a hand to her mouth. Poirot raised a hand, his gesture both gentle and authoritative. "Madame, allow me. Let us meet these guests, and then we shall proceed." He turned to the first figure, a man in his late 40s with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to carry the weight of too many years. His tweed suit was well made but worn, and his hands bore the calluses of a laborer, though his posture suggested refinement. "Dr. Malcolm Harrow," the man said gruffly, meeting Poirot's gaze. "I'm a physician, retired. Charles was an old friend from university. He wrote to me last week insisting I come, said it was urgent, but he didn't explain." Poirot nodded, his eyes lingering on the faint tremor in Harrow's left hand. "And you arrived when, Monsieur Harrow?" "This afternoon," Harrow replied. "I was in the library when it happened." Next was a woman, perhaps 30, with striking red hair pinned in an elegant chignon. Her emerald dress shimmered in the firelight, but her face was ashen, her lips pressed into a thin line. She introduced herself as Lillian Voss, a novelist of some repute, known for her Gothic tales of haunted estates and vengeful spirits. "Charles was a patron of the arts," she said, her voice low and melodic, though it carried an edge. "He invited me to discuss a minor project. I arrived yesterday evening." Poirot's mustache twitched. "A project, Mademoiselle Voss? Of what nature?" Her eyes flickered and she hesitated. He was vague. Something about a book, perhaps inspired by this place. He said it would be revelatory. The third guest was a young man, no older than 25, with a nervous energy that made him shift from foot to foot. His blonde hair was disheveled, and his suit was ill-fitting, as though borrowed from someone larger. Timothy Crane," he stammered. I was Charles's secretary. Been with him 6 months. He told me to come, said I'd be needed for something important." "And where were you, Monsieur Crane, when the scream was heard?" Poirot asked, his tone mild but probing. "In my room," Crane said quickly. "Unpacking. I didn't hear anything until Miss Blackthorne came for me." The fourth guest was an older woman, her silver hair pulled into a severe bun, her black dress buttoned to the throat. She sat ramrod straight, her hands folded, in her lap, and her eyes were cold, almost reptilian. "Mrs. Agatha Dunhill," she said, her voice crisp. "I am a historian, specializing in the occult. Charles consulted me about certain artifacts in his possession. I arrived this morning." Poirot's eyebrow rose slightly. "Artifacts, Madame Dunhill? Of what sort?" Her lips curled into a faint, enigmatic smile. "Old things. Dangerous things. Charles believed they held power. I was here to assess their authenticity." The final guest was a man in his 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a military bearing and a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. His dark eyes were guarded, and he stood slightly apart from the others, as though unwilling to be part of their circle. "Captain Victor Slade," he said curtly. "I served with Charles in the war. He asked me to come, said he needed my expertise. I got here at noon." "Expertise?" Poirot pressed, his voice soft but insistent. Slade's jaw tightened. "I'm a soldier, Monsieur Poirot. I deal in survival." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloging each introduction, each inflection, each evasion. 5 guests, each with a connection to Charles Blackthorne, each with a reason to be here, and perhaps a reason to kill. He turned to Evelyn. "And the staff, Madame?" 3, she said. "Mrs. Grimsby, the housekeeper, cook, who prepares our meals, and Jasper, the groundskeeper. They've been with the family for years." "Bon," Poirot said. "I will speak with them later. For now, mes amis, I must ask, did any of you see or hear anything unusual before?" "The scream?" Silence fell, heavy and fraught. The fire crackled, and outside the wind howled, rattling the windows. Lillian Voss spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I heard footsteps earlier, in the corridor outside my room. But when I looked, no one was there." Crane nodded vigorously. "I heard something too. A A scraping, like claws on wood, in the walls, I think. Mrs. Dunhill's eyes gleamed. This house is old, Monsieur Poirot. Old houses have their noises, and their secrets. Slade snorted. Superstition. It's just a drafty old pile. Harrow remained silent, his gaze fixed on the fire, but Poirot noted the way his fingers tightened around the arm of his chair. Very well, Poirot said. We shall reconvene tomorrow. For now, I suggest you all retire to your rooms and lock your doors. The guests exchanged uneasy glances, but they obeyed, dispersing into the shadowed corridors. Evelyn lingered, her eyes wide with fear. Monsieur Poirot, do you think it's safe? Poirot's smile was tight. Safety, madame, is an illusion until we know the truth. Rest, but be vigilant. As Evelyn led him to his room, Poirot's mind raced. The murder was no random act. It was deliberate, savage, and marked by that chilling message. It sees all. But what was it? A person? A thing? Or something worse? The manor seemed to pulse around him, its walls creaking as though alive. When he reached his room, he locked the door and checked the windows, ensuring they were secure. Sleep did not come easily. The darkness pressed against the glass, and more than once Poirot thought he heard footsteps outside his door. Slow, deliberate, and far too heavy to belong to any of the guests. He lay awake, his hand resting on the small revolver he always carried, his mind turning over the puzzle. And then, just before dawn, another scream shattered the silence. A scream that was cut off abruptly, leaving only the echo of terror. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his heart pounding. The game, it seemed, was far from over. Chapter 3. The crime scene unveiled. The second scream tore through Blackthorn Manor like a blade, sharp and sudden, slicing through the pre-dawn silence. Hercule Poirot, already awake, his revolver gripped tightly in one hand, flung open his bedroom door and stepped into the corridor. The air was thick with the same oppressive weight he had felt since arriving, but now it carried a new scent. Fresh blood, sharp and metallic, mingling with the musty decay of the old house. His heart thudded, but his mind was a steel trap, locking onto every sound, every shadow. The scream had come from the west wing where the guests' rooms were located. He moved swiftly, his polished shoes silent on the threadbare carpet, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The corridor was a tunnel of shadows, the flickering gas lamps casting grotesque shapes on the walls. The portraits seemed to leer, their painted eyes glinting with malice. Poirot's grip on his revolver tightened as he approached the source of the scream, a door at the far end of the hall, slightly ajar. A faint, sickly light spilled out, and with it came a low guttural sound, a moan, or perhaps something worse. He paused, his senses alert, and pushed the door open with the tip of his cane. The room was a guest chamber, similar to his own but larger, with heavy drapes drawn tight against the windows. The air was stifling, thick with the coppery tang of blood and something else, something acrid like burnt hair. In the center of the room, sprawled across a four-poster bed, lay Timothy Crane, the nervous young secretary. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, his face frozen in a rictus of terror. His throat, like Charles Blackthorne's, was torn open, the wound jagged and unnatural as though ripped by claws. Blood soaked the bedclothes, pooling on the floor, and above the bed, scrawled in the same crimson hand, were the words, "It knows all." Poirot's breath caught, but he forced himself to remain calm. He stepped closer, his eyes sweeping the scene, with clinical precision. The wound was fresh, the blood still glistening, suggesting the murder had occurred moments ago. Crane's hands were outstretched, fingers curled as though clutching at an unseen assailant. His nightshirt was torn, and beneath it, Poirot noticed faint scratches on his chest, shallow, but deliberate, forming a pattern that was almost ritualistic. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured, his voice barely audible. This is no mere killer. This is something else. Footsteps pounded behind him, and he turned to see Evelyn Blackthorne, her face ashen, her nightgown clutched tightly around her. "Monsieur Poirot," she gasped. "I heard the scream. What's happened?" Poirot raised a hand, his voice steady. "Madame, remain where you are. Monsieur Crane is dead." Evelyn's knees buckled, and she gripped the doorframe for support. "No, not Timothy. Not another—" Her voice broke and tears welled in her eyes, but Poirot noted a flicker of something else. Guilt, perhaps, or fear beyond the immediate horror. He turned back to the body, his mind racing. 2 murders in less than 12 hours, both marked by the same savage method, the same cryptic messages. It sees all, it knows all. The words seemed to pulse in the air as though the manor itself were speaking. Poirot knelt beside the bed, careful not to disturb the scene, and examined the scratches on Crane's chest. They formed a crude symbol, a circle bisected by a jagged line, with smaller marks radiating outward like spokes. It was unfamiliar, yet it stirred a memory, something from his studies of ancient cults and their esoteric sigils. "Madame Blackthorne," he said, rising. "Who has access to this wing of the house?" Evelyn swallowed hard. "Only the guests and the staff. The west wing is reserved for you all. The servants' quarters are in the east wing, and the family rooms, mine and Charles's, are on the 2nd floor." "And the staff?" Poirot pressed. "Where were they when this happened?" I don't know," she admitted. "Mrs. Grimsby usually retires early. Cook stays in the kitchen until late, and Jasper, he's often outside tending the grounds." Poirot nodded, filing the information away. "Summon the others. Madame, I must see them at once." As Evelyn hurried off, Poirot turned his attention to the room. The windows were locked, the heavy drapes undisturbed. The door showed no signs of forced entry, suggesting the killer had either had a key or been let in. He examined the floor, noting a faint trail of dirt, black, loamy soil, not the dust of the manor's ancient carpets. It led from the bed to the door, then vanished, as though the killer had taken care to cover their tracks. The remaining guests arrived, their faces a mix of shock and suspicion. Dr. Malcolm Harrow's weathered features were grim, his hands clenched into fists. Lillian Voss clutched a shawl around her shoulders, her red hair loose and wild, her eyes darting to the shadows. Mrs. Agatha Dunhill stood rigid, her cold gaze fixed on the body, while Captain Victor Slade lingered near the door, his scar stark against his pale skin. "What the devil is going on here?" Slade demanded, his voice rough. "First Charles, now the boy. This place is cursed." "Cursed?" Poirot's eyebrow rose. "Non, Monsieur Slade. A curse does not tear throats or write messages in blood. This is the work of a hand, human or otherwise." "Otherwise?" Lillian Voss's voice was sharp, almost mocking, but her hands trembled. "You can't mean to suggest—" "I suggest nothing," Poirot interrupted, his tone calm but firm. "I observe, and what I observe is a pattern. 2 murders, 2 messages. We must find what connects them." Mrs. Dunhill stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with an unsettling intensity. "That symbol," she said, pointing to the scratches on Crane's chest. "It's old. Very old. I've seen it in texts. Mesopotamian, perhaps, or older. It's a mark of invocation." "Invocation?" Harrow scoffed. "You're saying someone's summoning demons now?" "Not someone," Mrs. Dunhill replied, her voice low. "Something." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Madame Dunhill, your knowledge of the occult is noted, but let us not leap to conclusions. We deal in facts, and the fact is, someone, or something, entered this room and killed Monsieur Crane." He turned to the group, his eyes piercing. "Where were each of you when the scream was heard?" Harrow spoke first. "In my room, reading. I didn't hear anything until Miss Blackthorne knocked." Lillian nodded. "I was writing in my journal. The scream woke me from a nightmare." Slade crossed his arms. "I was in the billiard room practicing, heard the scream, came running." Mrs. Dunhill's lips curled slightly. "I was meditating, in my room." The energies of this house are potent. Poirot's gaze lingered on each of them, searching for the lie, the hesitation, the telltale sign of guilt. But their faces were masks, their stories plausible, yet unprovable. He turned to Evelyn. "And you, madame?" "I was in my room," she said softly. "I couldn't sleep after Charles. The scream brought me here." Poirot nodded, though his mind was far from satisfied. "Very well. This room will be locked, as was the study. No one enters until I have examined it further, and I must speak with the staff." As the group dispersed, Poirot lingered, his eyes returning to the symbol on Crane's chest. Mrs. Dunhill's words echoed in his mind, a mark of invocation. He was a man of reason, yet he could not deny the chill that ran through him, the sense that the manor itself was complicit in these crimes. The walls seemed to pulse, the shadows to shift, and for a moment, he thought he saw a figure in the corner of the room, a tall, gaunt silhouette, just as he had seen in the fog outside his London apartment. But when he blinked, it was gone. He locked the door and pocketed the key, his heart heavy. 2 murders, 2 messages, and a house that seemed to breathe with malice. As he descended the stairs to find the staff, a low, guttural laugh echoed through the corridor, a sound that was neither human nor animal but something in between. Poirot's hand tightened on his cane, his resolve hardening. "You may see all, mon ennemi," he whispered to the darkness, "but Hercule Poirot sees more." Chapter 4. Poirot's first impressions. The air in Blackthorn Manor seemed to thicken with each passing hour, as though the house itself were tightening its grip on its inhabitants. Hercule Poirot stood at the foot of the grand staircase, his sharp eyes scanning the shadowed corners of the hall, his mind a whirlwind of observations and suspicions. The guttural laugh that had followed him from Timothy Crane's room lingered in his memory, a sound that defied reason, yet demanded attention. 2 men were dead, Charles Blackthorn and his young secretary, both killed with savage precision, both marked by cryptic messages and an ancient symbol that hinted at something far darker than a mere murderer's hand. Poirot's little gray cells worked tirelessly, piecing together the fragments of this macabre puzzle, but the truth remained elusive, shrouded in the manor's oppressive gloom. The morning light, weak and gray, filtered through the tall windows, doing little to dispel the chill that clung to the air. Poirot had requested that Evelyn Blackthorn gather the staff in the dining room, where he intended to question them. As he made his way through the labyrinthine corridors, his polished shoes clicking against the cold stone floor, he noted the manor's decay. The peeling wallpaper, the warped floorboards, the faint smell of mildew that mingled with the ever-present scent of blood. Blackthorn Manor was not just old, it was wounded, its very walls scarred by some unspoken history. The dining room was a cavernous space, dominated by a long mahogany table set with tarnished silver candelabras. The fire in the hearth burned low, casting flickering shadows that seemed to writhe like living things. The 3 members of the staff stood waiting, their postures rigid, their faces a mix of fear and defiance. Evelyn stood to one side, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes red from unshed tears. Poirot surveyed the trio with his characteristic precision. First was Mrs. Grimsby, the housekeeper, a stout woman in her 60s with iron-gray hair pulled into a tight bun. Her black dress was immaculate, but her hands, gnarled and trembling, betrayed her unease. Next was Cook, a wiry man with a weathered face and deep-set eyes that darted nervously around the room. His apron was stained with grease and his fingers fidgeted with a small knife he carried at his belt. Finally, there was Jasper, the groundskeeper, a hulking figure with a scarred face and hands like shovels. His eyes were fixed on the floor, but Poirot noted the tension in his shoulders as though he were poised to flee or to fight. "Bonjour," Poirot said, his voice calm but commanding. "I am Hercule Poirot, and I am here to uncover the truth behind the deaths of Monsieur Charles Blackthorn and Monsieur Timothy Crane. You, as the staff of this house, are in a unique position to assist me. I will speak with each of you in turn, But first tell me, where were you when the second scream was heard just before dawn? Mrs. Grimsby spoke first, her voice sharp and clipped. I was in my room, sir, in the east wing. I heard the scream and came running, but by the time I reached the west wing, Miss Evelyn was already there. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. And you saw nothing unusual? No one in the corridors? Nothing, sir, she said, though her fingers twisted the edge of her apron. It was dark, and the house. It makes noises at night. Cook cleared his throat, his voice rough. I was in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Didn't hear the scream till it was over. Came up as quick as I could. And you, monsieur? Jasper? Poirot turned to the groundskeeper, whose massive frame seemed to fill the room. Jasper's voice was a low rumble. Outside, sir. Checking the stables. The horses were spooked, acting strange all night. Heard the scream and ran. In. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloging their responses. Each alibi was plausible, yet none could be verified. He stepped closer to the table, his gaze sweeping over the staff. Tell me, what do you know of this house? Its history, its peculiarities? Mrs. Grimsby's lips pursed. It's an old place, sir. Been in the Blackthorne family for centuries. There's stories, of course. Folks say it's haunted, but I don't hold with such nonsense. Stories? Poirot's mustache twitched. What kind of stories, madame? She hesitated, glancing at Evelyn, who gave a small nod. They say the manor was built on unholy ground. Long ago, before the Blackthorns, there was a temple here or some such. People disappeared, and the villagers blamed things that weren't human. Cook snorted. Old wives' tales. This place is drafty, that's all. Jasper, however, remained silent, his eyes still fixed on the floor. Poirot noted the way his hands clenched, the knuckles whitening. And you, Monsieur Jasper? Do you believe these tales? The groundskeeper's gaze flickered up, and for a moment Poirot saw something in his eyes. Fear, yes, but also knowledge. I've seen things, Jasper muttered. Shadows that move when they shouldn't. Voices in the wind. This house, it don't like us here. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. Poirot's expression remained impassive, but his mind was racing. Superstition was a distraction, yet he could not ignore the pattern. The murders, the symbols, the messages. It sees all. It knows all. He turned to Evelyn. Madame, are there records of this house's history? Documents perhaps in the library? Yes, she said softly. Charles kept old journals, family records. They're in the study, but after what happened there, I will examine them myself, Poirot said. Now I must see the grounds. Monsieur Jasper, you will accompany me. The groundskeeper nodded reluctantly, and Poirot dismissed the others, his eyes lingering on Mrs. Grimsby's trembling hands and Cook's nervous fidgeting. As he followed Jasper out into the cold morning air, the fog was thicker than ever, curling around the manor like a living shroud. The grounds were wild, overgrown with gnarled trees and thorny brambles, and the distant moor stretched out, bleak and desolate. Jasper led him to the stables, where the horses snorted and stamped, their eyes wide with unease. Poirot's gaze swept over the ground, noting the same black, loamy soil he had seen in Crane's room. This soil, he said, kneeling to touch it. It is unusual, non? Jasper shrugged. Comes from the moor. It's everywhere around here. Poirot's fingers brushed the earth, and for a moment he thought he felt a faint vibration, as though the ground itself were alive. He stood, brushing his hands clean, and turned to Jasper. You said the horses were spooked. Why? They've been like this for days, Jasper said, ever since Master Charles brought that thing into the house. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Thing? What thing? Jasper hesitated, then pointed to a shed at the edge of the grounds. He kept it, in there. Some old relic he found, wouldn't let me near it. Poirot's heart quickened, but he kept his voice calm. Show me. The shed was small, its wooden door warped and splintered. Jasper unlocked it with a rusted key, revealing a cluttered space filled with gardening tools and cobwebs. In the center on a wooden table sat a stone tablet, its surface carved with the same symbol Poirot had seen on Crane's chest, a circle bisected by a jagged line with radiating spokes. The air around it seemed to hum, and Poirot felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "What is this?" he asked, his voice low. "Don't know," Jasper said. "Master Charles said it was valuable, said it was, alive." Poirot's mind raced. The tablet, the symbol, the murders, it was all connected, but how? He turned to Jasper, his gaze piercing. "You will tell no one of this, and you will lock this shed." As they returned to the manor, Poirot's thoughts were a storm of questions. The tablet was a clue, perhaps the key to the horror unfolding in Blackthorn Manor. But before he could pursue it further, a shout echoed from the house, a cry of alarm, tinged with terror. He ran, his cane tapping against the gravel, and burst into the hall to find Lillian Voss standing at the foot of the stairs, her face white, her hands clutching a piece of paper. "Monsieur Poirot," she gasped, "I found this in my room." She handed him the paper, and Poirot's blood ran cold. Scrawled in the same crimson hand as the murder scenes were the words, "It takes all." The manor seemed to shudder around them, and from somewhere deep within its walls came that low, guttural laugh, closer now and more menacing than ever. Chapter 5. Clues in the Shadows. The words on the paper burned into Hercule Poirot's mind. "It takes all." The crimson scrawl, identical to the messages left at the murder scenes, seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, as though the ink itself were alive. He held the note carefully, his gloved fingers avoiding the edges, his sharp green eyes scanning every detail. The paper was the same heavy cream-colored stock as the letter that had summoned him to Blackthorn Manor, and the faint scent of lavender and blood lingered on it. Lillian Voss stood before him, her red hair disheveled, her emerald eyes wide with terror. The hall around them was silent, but the air thrummed with an unseen menace, as though the manor itself were holding its breath. "Mademoiselle Voss," Poirot said, his voice steady despite the chill creeping up his spine. "When did you find this note?" "Just now," Lillian whispered, her hands twisting the edge of her shawl. "It was on my pillow when I returned to my room after seeing poor Timothy. I swear, Monsieur Poirot, it wasn't there before." Poirot's mustache twitched as he studied her. Her fear seemed genuine, but he had learned long ago that fear could mask deceit. "And you saw no one enter your room? Heard nothing unusual?" She shook her head, her lips trembling. Only the sounds of the house. Creaks, whispers, things moving in the walls. I thought it was my imagination, but now..." Her voice trailed off, and she glanced at the note, her face paling. Further, Poirot folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket, his mind racing. 3 messages now. It sees all, it knows all, it takes all, each more ominous than the last. The progression suggested intent, a deliberate escalation, as though the killer were taunting them, drawing them deeper into a game of terror. But who, or what, was behind it? The stone tablet in the shed, with its ancient symbol, loomed in. His thoughts, as did Jasper's words, it was alive. "Return to the drawing room, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his tone firm but gentle. "I will join you shortly, and say nothing of this to the others, not yet." Lillian nodded, her steps unsteady as she retreated down the corridor. Poirot stood alone in the hall, the weight of the manor pressing against him. The shadows seemed to shift, pooling in corners where the light should have reached. He tightened his grip on his cane, his senses alert, and made his way to the library, determined to uncover the secrets hidden in Charles Blackthorn's records. The library was a vast, dimly lit chamber, its walls lined with shelves that groaned under the weight of ancient tomes. The air was thick with the scent of old leather and dust, and the high windows admitted only slivers of gray light, casting the room in a perpetual twilight. A massive oak desk stood at the center, cluttered with papers, journals, and a single, candle that flickered weakly. Poirot lit another candle, its flame steady in his hand, and began his search. The journals were old, their leather covers cracked and faded, inscribed with the Blackthorn family crest, a raven clutching a thorn. Poirot opened the most recent, dated a year prior, and scanned Charles's meticulous handwriting. The entries began innocently enough, detailing estate matters and social engagements, but as he read on, a darker thread emerged. Charles wrote of dreams, vivid, tormenting visions of a figure cloaked in shadow, its eyes burning like embers. "It watches me," he wrote. "It knows my sins." Poirot's brow furrowed. The entries grew more frantic, describing Charles's discovery of the stone tablet during an excavation on the moor. "It is older than the manor, older than the village," he wrote. "The villagers fear it, call it the Eye of the Abyss. They say it demands sacrifice." The final entry, dated the day before Poirot's arrival, was a single line. "I have awakened it, and it will not rest." A chill ran through Poirot, not from the words alone, but from a sudden draft that swept through the room, extinguishing his candle. The darkness closed in, and for a moment he thought he heard a whisper, a low, sibilant voice that seemed to come from the walls themselves. He relit the candle, his hands steady, and continued his search, pulling another journal from the shelf. This one was older, written by Charles's great-grandfather Ezekiel Blackthorn in the early 1800s. Ezekiel's entries were more measured, but no less disturbing. He described the manor's construction on the site of an ancient temple, its stones repurposed for the foundation. "The villagers warned us," he wrote, "but we did not listen. The ground is cursed, marked by blood. The thing beneath it hungers." Tucked between the pages was a crude sketch of the same symbol Poirot had seen on the tablet in Crane's chest, a circle bisected by a jagged line with radiating spokes. Beside it, Ezekiel had written, "The mark of the watcher, Poirot's heart, quickened. The watcher, the eye of the abyss." The pieces were beginning to align, but the picture they formed was one of horror beyond his rational mind. He closed the journal, his thoughts interrupted by a faint scratching sound like claws on wood, coming from the far end of the library. He moved silently, his revolver drawn, and approached a heavy bookcase that seemed out of place, its edges misaligned with the wall. With a gentle push, the bookcase swung inward, revealing a narrow passage cloaked in darkness. The air within was cold, damp, and heavy, with the scent of earth and decay. Poirot hesitated, his instincts warring with his curiosity, but the need for answers drove him forward. He stepped into the passage, the candle casting long shadows that danced like specters. The walls were rough-hewn stone etched with more symbols, circles, lines, and strange, twisting runes that seemed to writhe in the flickering light. The passage descended, spiraling into the bowels of the manor. The scratching grew louder, accompanied by a low, rhythmic thumping like a heartbeat. Poirot's grip on his revolver tightened as he reached a heavy iron door, its surface rusted but etched with the same symbol. He pushed it open, revealing a small chamber, its walls covered in crude, blood-red markings. In the center stood a stone altar, stained dark with what could only be blood, and above it, carved into the ceiling, was a massive version of the symbol, its lines seeming to pulse with an unnatural light. Poirot's breath caught. This was no mere cellar, it was a place of ritual, of sacrifice. The air was thick with a presence, something ancient and malevolent that pressed against his mind. He stepped closer to the altar, noting a small, leather-bound book resting on its surface. He opened it, his eyes scanning the pages. It was a ledger of sorts, listing names and dates stretching back centuries. Beside each name was a single word: taken. Before he could read further, the door slammed shut behind him, plunging the chamber into near darkness. The candle flickered wildly, and the thumping grew louder, faster, echoing in his chest. Poirot spun, his revolver raised, but there was no one there. Only the shadows which seemed to writhe and coil, forming shapes that were almost human, almost something else. "Who is there?" he called, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his heart. "Show yourself." The only answer was that guttural laugh, now so close it seemed to come from within the walls. The candle went out, and in the darkness Poirot felt a cold breath on the back of his neck, followed by a whisper. "It takes all." He fired his revolver blindly, the shot echoing like thunder, and the laugh ceased. When he relit the candle, the chamber was empty, the door ajar, the shadows still. But the book was gone, and on the altar, freshly scrawled in blood, was a new message. "It comes for you." Poirot's heart pounded, but he forced himself to move, retreating up the passage and back to the library. The manor was no longer just a crime scene. It was a predator, and he was its prey. As he emerged into the library, he heard footsteps above, followed by a cry, not a scream, but a wail of despair. He ran, his cane tapping against the floor, and burst into the drawing room to find the guests gathered, their faces pale. Evelyn stood at the center, clutching a blood-stained handkerchief. "Monsieur Poirot," she gasped. "It's Mrs. Grimsby. She's gone." Chapter 6. The Alibi Puzzle. The words hung in the air like a death knell. Mrs. Grimsby is gone. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing room of Blackthorn Manor, his sharp eyes flicking from Evelyn Blackthorn's tear-streaked face to the blood-stained handkerchief clutched in her trembling hands. The remaining guests, Dr. Malcolm Harrow, Lillian Voss, Mrs. Agatha Dunhill, and Captain Victor Slade, stood in a tense semicircle, their expressions a mix of shock, fear, and suspicion. The fire in the hearth sputtered, casting long shadows that seemed to claw at the edges of the room. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, a gray veil that trapped them in this house of horrors. The memory of the underground chamber. The blood-scrawled message, "It comes for you," burned in Poirot's mind, but he forced his focus to the present. Another piece of the puzzle had shifted, and he would not let it slip through his fingers. "Madame Blackthorn," Poirot said, his voice calm but edged with urgency. "Explain precisely what you mean by gone. Is Mrs. Grimsby dead, or has she vanished?" Evelyn's lips parted, but no sound came at first. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting to the handkerchief. I went to check on her after you left for the library. Her room was empty, but this," she held up the bloodied cloth, "was on her bed. The door was locked from the inside and the window was bolted. I don't know how." Poirot took the handkerchief, his gloved fingers handling it with care. The blood was fresh, still tacky, and the fabric carried the same faint scent of lavender and decay that clung to the manor itself. He examined it closely, noting a small tear at one corner as though it had been caught on something sharp. "And you saw no one else? Heard nothing?" "Nothing," Evelyn whispered. But the air, it felt wrong, heavy, like someone was watching. Poirot's mustache twitched. The pattern was clear. Charles Blackthorn, Timothy Crane, and now Mrs. Grimsby, each connected to the manor, each marked by blood and cryptic warnings. The messages, "It sees all, it knows all, it takes all, it comes for you," formed a chilling progression, as though some unseen force were tightening a noose around them all. The stone tablet, the underground chamber, and the ancient symbol etched in his memory pointed to something far beyond a human killer. Yet Poirot clung to his rationality. There was always a logical explanation, even for the inexplicable. He turned to the guests, his gaze piercing. "Mes amis, we are in a house where death stalks the corridors. I must know where each of you was in the last hour since I left for the library. Be precise." Dr. Harrow spoke first, his voice gruff. "I was in the billiard room having a drink, trying to make sense of this madness. I heard nothing until Miss Blackthorn's cry." Lillian Voss, her red hair still loose and wild, clutched her shawl tightly. "I was in the drawing room writing. I couldn't go back to my room after finding that note." Her eyes flickered to Poirot's pocket, where the note, "It takes all," was tucked away. Mrs. Dunhill's cold gaze met Poirot's without flinching. I was in the conservatory studying the plants. Some are quite rare, you know. I heard nothing. Captain Slade crossed his arms, his scar stark against his pale skin. I was in the east wing checking the doors. This place isn't safe and I don't trust anyone here. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Each alibi was vague, impossible to verify in a house this vast. He turned to the remaining staff who had joined them in the drawing room. Cook, his nervous eyes darting, and Jasper, the hulking groundskeeper, whose scarred face was unreadable, and, "You, Monsieur Cook?" Poirot asked. "In the kitchen," Cook said quickly. "Cleaning up after breakfast. Didn't hear a thing till Miss Evelyn called." Jasper's voice was a low rumble. "I was in the stables again. Horses are still spooked. Came when I heard the shouting." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloging their responses. Too many alibis, too few witnesses. He turned to Evelyn. "Take me to Mrs. Grimsby's room. I must see it for myself." The housekeeper's room was in the east wing, a modest space with a single bed, a wardrobe, and a small window overlooking the moor. The door was indeed locked, and Poirot used a skeleton key from Evelyn to open it. The room was tidy, almost austere, but the bed was in disarray, the sheets stained with blood. The handkerchief had been found here, Evelyn said, but there was no body, no sign of struggle beyond the blood. Poirot examined the window, bolted as Evelyn had claimed, and the floor, where he found traces of the same black loamy soil he had seen in Crane's room in the shed. "This soil," he said, kneeling to inspect it. "It is from the moor. Oui?" Evelyn nodded. "It's everywhere around the manor. Jasper tracks it in sometimes." Poirot's eyes narrowed. The soil was a clue, but it was too common to pinpoint a suspect. He stood, his gaze sweeping the room. Something was off, a faint misalignment in the wardrobe's position. He approached it, running his fingers along the edge, and found a hidden catch. With a soft click, the wardrobe swung open, revealing a narrow passage similar to the one in the library. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "This house is a labyrinth of secrets." The passage was dark, its walls cold and damp, and the air carried the same acrid scent of burnt hair he had noticed in Crane's room. Poirot lit a candle, its flame trembling in the draught, and stepped inside. The passage sloped downward, joining the network he had discovered beneath the library. He followed it cautiously, his revolver drawn, until he reached a junction where the walls were etched with more symbols, circles, jagged lines, and runes that seemed to pulse in the candlelight. At the end of the passage was another chamber, smaller than the one with the altar but no less sinister. The walls were covered in crude drawings, figures with burning eyes, hands reaching from shadows, and the same symbol repeated obsessively. In the center of the floor was a pool of blood, fresh and glistening, but no body. Scratched into the stone beside it was a single word, Grimsby. Poirot's heart pounded, but he forced himself to remain calm. Mrs. Grimsby had not vanished. She had been taken, just as the note had warned. He examined the chamber, noting a small, iron ring embedded in the floor. He pulled it, revealing a trapdoor that led to a deeper level, a black void that seemed to swallow the light. The air from below was cold, heavy with the scent of earth and something fouler, rot perhaps, or worse. He hesitated, his rational mind warring with the primal fear that gripped him. But before he could decide whether to descend, a scream echoed from above, not a cry of pain, but one of rage. He retraced his steps, emerging into the housekeeper's room just as Captain Slade burst in, his face flushed, his eyes wild. "Poirot!" Slade barked. "It's Harrow. He's lost it. Attacked Lillian in the drawing room." Poirot ran, his cane tapping against the floor, and entered the drawing room to find Harrow pinned against the wall by Slade, his weathered face contorted with fury. Lillian stood in the corner, her cheek red from a blow, her journal clutched to her chest. Mrs. Dunhill watched from a chair, her expression unreadable, while Evelyn tried to calm the situation. "What is the meaning of this?" Poirot demanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "He's mad," Lillian cried. "He accused me of writing those notes, said I'm behind it all. Harrow struggled against Slade's grip. She's lying. I saw her sneaking around last night near Crane's room. She's not what she seems. Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. Enough. Monsieur Harrow, explain yourself. Harrow's eyes burned with desperation. I'm telling you, she's involved. I heard her muttering in her room last night. Strange words like a chant. And that journal of hers, she's always writing. In it? Hiding it. She knows something. Lillian's face flushed. That's absurd. I'm a writer. It's what I do. You're paranoid, Doctor. Poirot's gaze flicked to the journal, then to Harrow's trembling hands. Mademoiselle Voss, may I see this journal? Lillian hesitated, her grip tightening. It's private. Just stories, ideas for my novels. Then you will not mind if I glance at it, Poirot said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, she handed it over. Poirot flipped through the pages, finding sketches of the manor, notes on its history, and, tucked between two pages, a drawing of the symbol, meticulously rendered in ink. His eyes met Lillian's, and for a moment he saw fear but also defiance. Explain this, mademoiselle, he said softly. Before she could answer, the lights in the room flickered, and a low, guttural laugh echoed through the manor, closer than ever. The fire in the hearth flared, then died, plunging the room into darkness. And from the shadows came a whisper, chilling and clear. It claims all. Chapter 7. Secrets of the Past. The Whisper. It claims all, hung in the darkened drawing room like a specter, its words coiling around Hercule Poirot's mind like smoke. The fire had gone out, leaving only the faint glow of a single candle that trembled in Evelyn Blackthorne's hand. The faces of the remaining guests, Dr. Malcolm Harrow, Lillian Voss, Mrs. Agatha Dunhill, and Captain Victor Slade, were pale in the dim light, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and suspicion. The air in Blackthorne Manor was thick with dread, the walls themselves seeming to pulse with a malevolent energy. Poirot's heart raced, but his face remained a mask of calm, his little gray cells working furiously to unravel the threads of this escalating nightmare. He held Lillian's journal, the drawing of the ancient symbol, a circle bisected by a jagged line with radiating spokes, staring up at him like an accusation. Her explanation, cut off by the whisper and the darkness, lingered unanswered. Poirot's grip tightened on the journal, his revolver still in his other hand, a silent reminder of the danger that lurked in every shadow. The manor was no longer just a house. It was a predator, and they were its prey. Mademoiselle Voss, Poirot said, his voice cutting through the oppressive silence. You will explain this drawing. Now. Lillian's lips parted, but her voice faltered. Her eyes darted to the others, then back to Poirot. It's research, she said finally, her tone defensive. For my novel. Charles told me about the manor's history, the old stories. I sketched it from one of his books. Which book? Poirot pressed, his gaze unrelenting. I don't remember, she snapped, her fear giving way to defiance. He showed me so many. Old journals, grimoires, things he kept in the study. He was obsessed with that symbol, said it was tied to the manor's curse. Harrow snorted, his weathered face twisted with skepticism. Convenient. You expect us to believe you're just an innocent writer? Enough, Poirot said, raising a hand. Mademoiselle Voss, you will show me this book when we return to the library, but first we must address the matter of Mrs. Grimsby. He turned to Evelyn, who stood trembling, the candle casting flickering shadows across her face. Madam, you said Mrs. Grimsby's room was locked from the inside, yet she is gone and there is blood. We must search the house, every room, every passage. Slade stepped forward, his military bearing rigid. I'll check the east wing again. If she's hiding, or if something took her, I'll find it. No one goes alone, Poirot said sharply. We stay together, or in pairs. This house is not safe. Mrs. Dunhill's cold eyes gleamed in the candlelight. Wise, Monsieur Poirot. The energies here are unstable. Whatever is hunting, Us does not follow human rules. Harrow rolled his eyes. More occult nonsense. We're dealing with a killer, not a ghost. Are we? Mrs. Dunhill's voice was soft, almost mocking. Then explain the messages, Doctor. Explain the laughter. Poirot's mustache twitched. He had no patience for superstition, but he could not deny the unnatural quality of the events unfolding. The symbol, the tablet, the underground chamber, all pointed to something ancient, something that defied his rational mind. Yet he would not succumb to fear. We will search in pairs, he repeated. Madame Blackthorne, you will come with me. Monsieur Slade, take Dr. Harrow. Madame Dunhill, you will go with Mademoiselle Voss. And you, Monsieur Cook, remain with Jasper to guard the drawing room. Cook nodded nervously, his fingers twitching at his knife while Jasper's scarred face remained unreadable. The group dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the silent manner. Poirot and Evelyn headed for the library, where he hoped to find the book Lillian had mentioned and perhaps more answers. The library was as oppressive as before, its shelves looming like sentinels in the dim light. Poirot lit several candles, their flames casting a warm but inadequate glow. He handed Lillian's journal to Evelyn, instructing her to hold it, and began searching the shelves, his fingers brushing over dusty spines. Charles's journals, which he had examined earlier, were still on the desk, but he sought something older, something that might explain the symbol and the manor's cursed history. Madame, he said to Evelyn, you grew up in this house. Did Charles ever speak of the temple your ancestor mentioned, the one beneath the manor? Evelyn hesitated, her eyes shadowed. Not directly, but he changed in the last year. He spent hours in the study, reading, muttering about the past. He said the manor was alive, that it remembered things. I thought he was losing his mind. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you did not think to mention this before? I was afraid, she admitted, her voice breaking. Charles was always secretive, but after he found that tablet, he became obsessed. He said it spoke to him, told him things. Poirot paused, his hand resting on a leather-bound volume. Spoke to him? In what way? Dreams, she whispered. Visions. He said it showed him the truth about our family. Poirot pulled the volume from the shelf, a grimoire, its pages brittle and yellowed, written in a language he did not recognize. The symbol was there, etched on the cover, and inside were drawings of rituals, sacrifices, and a figure with burning eyes. The text spoke of the Watcher, a being bound to the land, awakened by blood. It sees, it knows, it takes. One passage, read. It claims what is owed. A chill ran through Poirot, but before he could read further, a shout echoed from the east wing. Slade's voice, sharp with alarm. Poirot and Evelyn ran, the grimoire tucked under his arm, and found Slade and Harrow in the servants' quarters, standing over a trapdoor in the floor. It was open, revealing a dark, spiraling staircase that descended into the earth. Found it in Cook's room, Slade said, his scar twitching. It was hidden under a rug. There's blood on the steps. Poirot peered into the darkness, the same cold, foul air rising from below as he had felt in the underground chamber. Did you see Cook or Jasper? Harrow shook his head. They were supposed to stay in the drawing room, but when we checked, they were gone. Poirot's heart sank. The net was tightening, the manor closing in. He turned to Evelyn. Stay with Monsieur Slade and Monsieur Harrow. I will investigate. Alone? Evelyn's voice was sharp with fear. Monsieur Poirot, you can't. I must, he said firmly. The truth lies below. He descended the staircase, his candle flickering in the damp air. The steps were worn, slick with blood, and the same black soil that seemed to permeate the manor. The walls were etched with more symbols, their lines glowing faintly as though alive. At the bottom was another chamber. Larger than the others, its ceiling vaulted like a crypt. In the center stood a stone pillar carved with the symbol, and around it were chains, rusted but strong, as though something had been bound there. On the floor, sprawled in a pool of blood, was Mrs. Grimsby. Her throat was torn, her eyes wide with terror, and above her, scrawled in blood, was a new message. It owns all. Poirot's breath caught, but he forced himself to examine the body. The wound was identical to the others, jagged and unnatural. Her hands clutched a small silver locket, its chain broken. He opened it, finding a faded photograph of a young girl, Evelyn perhaps, or another Blackthorn. Tucked inside was a scrap of paper with a single word: forgive. Before he could process this, a low guttural laugh echoed through the chamber, followed by the sound of chains rattling. Poirot spun, his revolver raised, but the chamber was empty, save for the shadows which seemed to writhe and coil, forming the shape of a tall, gaunt figure with burning eyes. "Show yourself," Poirot called, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. The laugh grew louder and the shadows lunged, extinguishing his candle. In the darkness, he felt a cold hand brush his arm and a whisper hissed in his ear. "You cannot stop it." When the candle relit, the chamber was empty, the chains still, the message unchanged. But the locket was gone, and Poirot's heart pounded, with a truth he could no longer deny. The manor was alive, and it was hunting them all. Chapter 8. The Interrogation Game. The darkness of the underground chamber clung to Hercule Poirot like a second skin as he ascended the blood-slicked staircase, his candle casting wild shadows on the symbol-etched walls. The memory of the cold hand on his arm, the whisper, "You cannot stop it," and the vanished locket burned in his mind, each detail a jagged piece of the puzzle that was Blackthorn Manor. Mrs. Grimsby's body, her throat torn, the message, "It owns all," scrawled above her, confirmed the relentless pattern. A killer or something worse was stalking them, its purpose as ancient as the stones beneath the house. Poirot's heart pounded, but his resolve was iron. He would not yield to fear, not when the truth was so close, yet so maddeningly elusive. Emerging into the servants' quarters, he found Captain Victor Slade, Dr. Malcolm Harrow, and Evelyn Blackthorn waiting, their faces pale in the dim light of a single lantern. Slade's scar twitched, his hand resting on the hilt of a knife at his belt, while Harrow's weathered features were tight with barely controlled panic. Evelyn clutched the grimoire Poirot had taken from the library, her eyes wide with dread. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, "what did you find?" Poirot's voice was steady, though his mind raced. "Mrs. Grimsby is dead, in a chamber below. The same method, the same symbol, and another message. It owns all. We are running out of time. Mes amis, the killer is among us, or within this house itself." Harrow's fists clenched. "This is madness. You're saying the house is killing us?" "Not the house," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "Something tied to it. Something awakened by Charles Blackthorn's actions. But we will uncover it through logic, not fear. Where are Mademoiselle Voss, Madame Dunhill, Cook, and Jasper?" Slade's jaw tightened. Voss and Dunhill were searching the west wing. Cook and Jasper were supposed to stay in the drawing room, but they're gone. I checked. No sign of them. Poirot's mustache twitched. The absence of Cook and Jasper was a thread he could not ignore. We must find them. But first we return to the drawing room. I will question each of you further. No one leaves my sight. The group moved through the manor's shadowed corridors, the air heavy with the scent of blood and decay. The drawing room was as they had left it, the fire now a pile of embers, the windows fogged with mist. Lillian Voss and Mrs. Agatha Dunhill were already there, seated apart, their faces masks of tension. Lillian's journal lay on the table, its pages open to the sketch of the symbol, while Dunhill's cold eyes followed Poirot like a predator's. "Where are Cook and Jasper?" Poirot demanded, his voice sharp. Lillian shook her head. "They were here when we left to search the west wing. We found nothing, no blood, no signs of a struggle." Dunhill's lips curled into a faint smile. "Perhaps they fled. Or perhaps they were taken." Poirot ignored her cryptic tone and turned to the group, his presence commanding. "Mes amis, we are in a game of cat and mouse, and the mouse does not yet know its hunter. I will question each of you, and you will answer truthfully. Lies will only tighten the noose around us all." He began with Evelyn, his tone gentle but probing. "Madame Blackthorn, You said Charles changed after finding the tablet. Did he ever mention a ritual, a sacrifice, or a name? The Watcher, perhaps? Evelyn's hands trembled, the grimoire slipping slightly in her grip. He spoke of the Watcher once, in a fever. He said it demanded payment for the family's sins. I thought it was delirium, but he was so afraid. Poirot nodded, filing the information away. He turned to Harrow. Monsieur Harrow, you were Charles's friend. Did he confide in you about this tablet or the manor's history? Harrow's eyes flickered with unease. He wrote to me about his dreams, shadows, eyes in the dark. I told him to see a doctor, but he insisted I come here. Said I'd understand. Once I saw the tablet, I thought he was mad. Poirot's gaze shifted to Lillian. Mademoiselle Voss, your journal contains the symbol. You claim it is research, yet you hesitated to show it. What are you hiding? Lillian's cheeks flushed, but her voice was defiant. I told you it's for my novel. Charles gave me access to his books, his notes. He was obsessed with the Manor's past. Said it would make my career. I sketched what I saw. And what else did you see? Poirot pressed, his eyes boring into hers. She faltered, then whispered, I saw something. Last night, in the corridor. A shadow, tall and thin, with eyes like fire. I thought it was a dream. Mrs. Dunhill laughed softly, a sound that sent a shiver through the room. Not a dream, mademoiselle. The Watcher sees us all. Poirot turned to her, his patience thinning. Madame Dunhill, you speak of this Watcher as if you know it. What is it? And what do you know of the tablet? Dunhill's smile widened, her eyes gleaming. The tablet is a key, Monsieur Poirot. A door to something ancient, bound to this land. Charles was a fool to disturb it. The Watcher demands tribute. Blood. For blood. Slade slammed his fist on the table. Enough of this nonsense. We're dealing with a killer, not some fairy tale. Poirot, I say we search the grounds. Find Cook and Jasper, drag them back here. Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. Patience, Monsieur Slade. We will search, but first I must understand the alibis. Each of you claims to have been alone, or with one other when Mrs. Grimsby disappeared. Yet the blood was fresh, the act recent. Someone is lying. He paced the room, his cane tapping rhythmically, his mind a storm of connections. The symbol, the tablet, the messages, the underground chambers, all pointed to a ritualistic purpose. But the human element could not be ignored. Someone in this room, or someone missing, was orchestrating this terror, or serving it. Madame. Blackthorne, he said, stopping abruptly. The locket I found with Mrs. Grimsby. It contained a photograph, perhaps of you, and a note. Forgive. What does it mean? Evelyn's face drained of color. A locket? I gave one to Mrs. Grimsby years ago when I was a child. She was like a mother to me after mine died. But I don't know about any note. Poirot's eyes narrowed. The locket's disappearance in the chamber suggested the killer, or the Watcher, had taken it. But why? He was about to press further when a crash echoed from the hall, followed by a guttural scream. Not human, but animalistic, raw with pain. The group froze, then Slade bolted for the door, Poirot close behind. They found Jasper in the hall, slumped against the wall, his scarred face bloodied, his hands clutching a wound on his side. Blood pooled beneath him, and his eyes were wide with terror. It got Cook, he gasped, in the cellar. I tried to stop it. Poirot knelt beside him, his voice urgent. What did you see, Monsieur Jasper? Jasper's breath rattled. Eyes. Burning eyes. It took him into the dark. The tablet. It's awake. Before Poirot could ask more, Jasper's eyes rolled back, and he slumped, unconscious or worse. Slade checked his pulse, his face grim. He's alive, but barely. Poirot stood, his mind racing. Cook was gone. Jasper wounded, and the Manor's secrets were unraveling faster than he could grasp them. He turned to the group, now gathered in the hall, their faces a gallery of fear. Mes amis, he said, his voice steel. "We are no longer just victims. We are players in a game older than this house. We must find the cellar Jasper spoke of, now." As they moved toward the east wing, the manor groaned, the shadows deepening, and from somewhere below, that guttural laugh rose again, joined by a new sound, a low rhythmic chanting that seemed to come from the very stones. Chapter 9. A twist of motive. The guttural laugh and the rhythmic chanting pulsed through Blackthorn Manor like a heartbeat, reverberating in the bones of Hercule Poirot and the dwindling group of survivors. The air was thick with the stench of blood and decay, the shadows writhing as though alive, and the manor itself seemed to tighten its grip, its walls closing in like the jaws of a trap. Jasper, the groundskeeper, lay slumped in the hall, his bloodied form a stark reminder of the violence that stalked them. His words, "It took him," into the dark, echoed in Poirot's mind, mingling with the chilling progression of messages. It sees all, it knows all, it takes all, it owns all. Now with Cook missing and Jasper barely clinging to life, Poirot knew the time for hesitation was over. The truth, however monstrous, was within reach. He turned to the group: Evelyn Blackthorn, Dr. Malcolm Harrow, Lillian Voss, Mrs. Agatha Dunhill, and Captain Victor Slade, their faces pale and drawn, each a potential ally or adversary. The chanting grew louder, a low, guttural cadence that seemed to come from beneath the floor, its words unintelligible but heavy with menace. Poirot's hand tightened on his revolver, his cane a steady counterpoint to the chaos threatening to engulf his rational mind. "Mes amis," he said, his voice cutting through the oppressive air. "We must find this cellar Jasper spoke of. Monsieur Slade, Monsieur Harrow, carry Jasper to the drawing room and tend to his wounds. Madame Blackthorn, Mademoiselle Voss, Madame Dunhill, you will come with me. We descend together." Slade's scar twitched, his eyes narrowing. "You trust them? After everything?" "I trust no one," Poirot replied, his tone icy. "But I will not leave anyone alone in this house. Move quickly." Harrow and Slade lifted Jasper, his groans faint as they carried him away. Poirot led the three women toward the east wing, where Jasper had mentioned the cellar. The chanting grew louder with every step, a relentless drone that seemed to vibrate in their chests. The corridors were darker now, the gas lamps flickering, as though starved of air, and the symbols etched into the walls, circles bisected by jagged lines, glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the chant. Evelyn clutched the grimoire, her knuckles white. "Monsieur Poirot, what is that sound?" It's not human." "Not entirely," Mrs. Dunhill murmured, her cold eyes gleaming with an unsettling mix of fear and fascination. "It's the language of the old ones, the ones bound to this land. Charles was a fool to disturb them." Lillian's voice was sharp. "Stop it, Agatha, you're making it worse. This is a murderer, not some ancient spirit." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Mademoiselle Voss, Madame Dunhill, your theories are noted, but we deal in evidence. The cellar will tell us more." They reached a heavy oak door in the east wing, half hidden behind a tattered tapestry. The air was colder here, heavy with the scent of earth and something fouler, rot, blood, and a metallic tang that set Poirot's nerves on edge. The door was unlocked, creaking open to reveal a stone staircase descending into darkness. The chanting was deafening now, a chorus of voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, their rhythm hypnotic, pulling at the edges of Poirot's mind. He lit a candle, its flame trembling, and led the way down. The stairs were slick with moisture, the walls damp and etched with more symbols, some smeared with blood. At the bottom was a vast cellar, its ceiling supported by crumbling stone pillars. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and in the center of the room stood a stone dais, its surface stained dark with blood. Above it, carved into the ceiling, was the largest version of the symbol yet, its lines glowing with an unnatural light. And there, sprawled on the dais, was Cook. His throat was torn, his eyes wide with terror, his hands clutching at the air, as though he had fought to his last breath. Scrawled in blood beside him was a new message: "It binds all." Poirot's heart pounded, but he forced himself to approach, his eyes scanning the scene. The wound was identical to the others, jagged, unnatural, as though made by claws. The dais was surrounded by a ring of black soil, the same loamy earth he had seen throughout the manor, and embedded in it were fragments of bone, ancient and yellowed. The chanting stopped abruptly, leaving a silence that was somehow worse, as though the manor were holding its breath. Evelyn stifled a sob while Lillian turned away, her face pale. Mrs. Dunhill, however, stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the symbol. "It's a seal," she whispered. "A binding." Charles tried to control it, but he failed. "Control what?" Poirot demanded, his voice sharp. "The Watcher," she said, her tone reverent. "It's not just a spirit, it's a force, older than time. It feeds on blood, on sacrifice. The tablet was its prison, and Charles set it free." Poirot's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The tablet, the symbols, the murders, all part of a ritual, a cycle of blood tied to the manor's history. But there was a human hand in this, he was certain. Someone was using the legend, orchestrating the terror for their own ends. He turned to Evelyn. "Madame, the locket I found with Mrs. Grimsby. You said it was yours. Did Charles ever speak of it?" Evelyn's eyes widened. "No, but Mrs. Grimsby knew things about our family, things she wouldn't tell me. She said they were too dangerous." Poirot's gaze shifted to Lillian. "And you, mademoiselle? Your journal, why the symbol? And why did you hide it?" Lillian's defiance faltered. "I told you it was research, but Charles showed me the tablet. He said it was the key to everything, that it could make me famous. I didn't believe him, but I sketched it anyway." Mrs. Dunhill laughed softly. "Fame? Oh, child, you have no idea what you've touched." Before Poirot could press further, a scream tore through the cellar. Not from above, but from deeper within, where a shadowed archway led to another chamber. The women froze, but Poirot moved toward it, his revolver raised. "Stay here," he ordered, though he knew they would follow. The archway opened into a smaller room, its walls covered in crude, blood-red drawings of figures with burning eyes. In the center was a stone table, and on it lay a pile of objects: the locket from Mrs. Grimsby's body, a blood-stained knife, and a small leather-bound book, the same one Poirot had seen in the altar chamber, now open to a page listing names. Beside Cook's name was a fresh entry, Jasper. Poirot's blood ran cold. Jasper was still alive when they left him, or was he? He turned to the women, his voice urgent. "We must return to the drawing room now." They raced back through the cellar and up the stairs, the manor groaning around them. In the drawing room they found Slade and Harrow standing over Jasper, who lay motionless on the floor. His wound had been bandaged, but his face was ashen, his breathing shallow. "He's alive," Slade said, his voice tight. "But he's fading fast." Poirot knelt beside Jasper, checking his pulse. It was weak, erratic. "Monsieur Jasper," he said softly, "what did you see in the cellar?" Jasper's eyes fluttered open, his voice a ragged whisper. It wasn't human. Eyes, like fire. It took Cook, and it wanted me. The tablet. Destroy it." His head lolled, and his breathing stopped. Harrow checked his pulse, shaking his head. "He's gone." Poirot stood, his mind a storm of revelations. The tablet was the key, but someone was using it, manipulating the terror. He turned to the group, his eyes piercing. "One of you knows more than you say. The locket, the book, the tablet, they are connected, and I will find how." As he spoke, the lights flickered and the chanting resumed, louder, faster, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from within the walls. The air grew colder, and from the shadows came a new sound, a slow, deliberate scraping like claws on stone moving closer. Chapter 10. The Final Revelation. The scraping sound, slow, deliberate, like claws dragging across stone, sent a shiver through the drawing room, where Hercule Poirot stood among the dwindling survivors of Blackthorn Manor. The air was thick, with the stench of blood and fear, the walls pulsing with the relentless chanting that seemed to rise from the very foundations of the house. Jasper's lifeless body lay at their feet, his final words, "The tablet, destroy it," echoing in Poirot's mind like a warning from beyond the grave. The messages, "It sees all, it knows all, it takes all, it owns all, it binds all," formed a sinister crescendo, and now, with the scraping growing closer, Poirot knew the endgame was upon them. His little gray cells worked furiously, piecing together the clues: the stone tablet, the ancient symbol, the underground chambers, and the human hand that had turned a legend into a nightmare. The survivors, Evelyn Blackthorne, Dr. Malcolm Harrow, Lillian Voss, Mrs. Agatha Dunhill, and Captain Victor Slade, stood frozen, their eyes darting to the shadowed corners of the room. The fire was dead, the candles flickering wildly, and the fog outside pressed against the windows like a living thing, sealing them in. Poirot's revolver was steady in his hand, his cane a silent anchor to his resolve. He would not falter, not when the truth was so close, even if it came cloaked in horror. "Mes amis," he said, his voice a blade of calm in the chaos. "We are at the heart of the mystery. The tablet is the key, and one of you knows its secret. Speak now, or we may all pay the price." Evelyn's voice trembled. "Monsieur Poirot, I swear I don't know what Charles unleashed. He was obsessed, but he hid it from me." Harrow's fists clenched, his weathered face taut. "This is no time for games, Poirot. Something's coming. Can't you hear it?" Lillian clutched her journal, her red hair wild, her eyes defiant. "I told you. I only sketched what Charles showed. I'm not part of this." Mrs. Dunhill's cold smile was unnerving. "You're all blind. The Watcher is awake, and it will not be denied." Slade's hand rested on his knife, his scar stark against his pale skin. "Enough talk. We need to find that tablet and smash it." Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind racing through the clues. The locket, the book of names, the blood-stained messages, all pointed to a human orchestrating the terror, using the Manor's dark history as a weapon. But who? He turned to Dunhill, her occult knowledge a thread he could not ignore. "Madame, Dunhill, you speak of the Watcher as if you understand it. What is its purpose, and why these murders?" Her eyes gleamed, her voice low and reverent. "The Watcher is eternal, bound to this land by blood. The tablet is its anchor, its prison. Charles broke the seal, and now it demands tribute, lives for its freedom." "Freedom?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "Or is someone using this legend to cover their own crimes?" Before Dunhill could answer, the scraping stopped, replaced by a low, guttural laugh that seemed to come from within the walls. The candles went out, plunging the room into darkness, and the chanting surged, a cacophony of voices that shook the floor. Evelyn screamed, and Slade cursed, his knife drawn. Poirot relit a candle, his hand steady, and saw a shadow move, a tall, gaunt figure with burning eyes, just as Lillian had described, standing in the doorway. "Stay together," he shouted, raising his revolver. But the figure vanished, and in its place came a new sound, a heavy thud, like a body hitting the floor. When the candlelight steadied, Lillian was gone. Her journal lay open on the floor, its pages fluttering, as though stirred by an unseen wind. Poirot snatched it up, his eyes scanning the last entry. "I saw it again. It knows my name." "She's been taken," Evelyn cried, her voice breaking. Poirot's mind raced. The pattern was clear. Each victim was connected to the Manor, each marked by the symbol. But Lillian's disappearance was different. No blood, no body. He turned to the group, his voice urgent. "We must find the tablet. Monsieur Slade, Madame Blackthorne, check the shed. Monsieur Harrow, Madame Dunhill, with me to the cellar." They split up, fear driving their steps. Poirot led Harrow and Dunhill back to the cellar where Cook had been found, the stone dais still stained with his blood. The symbol above glowed brighter now, its light pulsing in time with the chanting. Poirot searched the room, his eyes catching on a loose stone in the wall. He pried it free, revealing a hidden niche containing the tablet. Its surface warm to the touch, the symbol etched deep, almost alive. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "The source of the horror." Dunhill's eyes widened. "You mustn't touch it, Monsieur Poirot. It's dangerous." "Dangerous?" Poirot's tone was sharp. "It is a stone, madame, manipulated by a human hand. Someone is using this to kill." Harrow's face twisted with panic. "Then destroy it. Smash it now." Before Poirot could respond, a scream echoed from above. Lillian's voice, raw with terror. They ran, the tablet in Poirot's hands, and burst into the hall to find Slade and Evelyn dragging Lillian from a hidden passage. Her face was ashen, her wrists bloodied as though she had been bound. It took me," she gasped. "I saw it. The Watcher. It's real." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Where, mademoiselle?" She pointed to the passage, its entrance hidden behind a portrait. Poirot led the way, the group following, their candles casting flickering light on the symbol-etched walls. The passage opened into a vast chamber, larger than any they had seen, its ceiling lost in darkness. In the center stood an altar surrounded by chains, and on it lay the book of names open to a new entry, Lillian. But it was the figure at the altar that stopped them cold, a cloaked shape, tall and gaunt, its eyes burning like embers. The chanting reached a fever pitch and the figure turned, revealing not a monster but a face. Evelyn Blackthorne. "Madame?" Poirot's voice was a whisper, his revolver raised. Evelyn's face was a mask of torment. "I had to," she said, her voice breaking. "The Watcher demanded it. Charles woke it and it spoke to me. It promised to spare me if I gave it others." Poirot's heart sank, the final piece clicking into place. "You wrote the messages. You used the tablet, the legend, to cover your murders." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't want to. But it's in my blood, the Blackthorn curse. Mrs. Grimsby knew, tried to stop me. I had to silence her." The figure behind her laughed, its eyes flaring, and Poirot realized the truth. Evelyn was the hand, but the Watcher was real. Feeding on her fear, her guilt, he raised the tablet, his voice steady. "This ends now." He smashed the tablet against the altar, the stone shattering into fragments. The chanting stopped, the figure screamed, a sound that tore at their souls. And the shadows collapsed, the eyes fading. Evelyn fell to her knees, sobbing, the spell broken. But as the group exhaled, the manor groaned, and a new message appeared on the altar, carved into the stone. "It is not over." Poirot's heart pounded, but he turned to the group, his voice resolute. "We leave this place now. The police will handle Madame Blackthorne." As they fled the manor, the fog parting to reveal the dawn, Poirot knew the Watcher was not gone, only weakened. The truth was his, but the horror of Blackthorne Manor would haunt him forever.